Hello, and welcome to this video about the DSI, which is the individual application process for a minimization license. We're going to concentrate on two aspects. The first being eligibility, to find out whether your property is apt for an MIT license or not. We will go into how you prove that. So the first thing we'll look at is the criteria for being considered apt, and the second thing that we will study is the documentation that you have to attach to your application in order to prove that your property is eligible. And the second thing we're going to study today is the application form for the MIT license. Unfortunately, the application form is only in Spanish, but I'm going to translate each section so that you know what's required and what's not required for that first part. Okay, let's begin. This is the diagram demonstrating the workflow of a DSI application for minimization license, and it appears in the DSI guidebook, well, the minimization guidebook, which is translated into Spanish, English, and Valenciano. And within that book, there are explanations of the step-by-step workflow of the application process. We're going to begin with the first phase, which is the declaration. There are only two phases, the declaration and the request for a license. In the first phase, the owner of the property or the representative of the owner of the property completes an application form, attaches the relevant documentation to prove compliance or eligibility, and submits that to the relevant local authority, the council. The council will consider the application. The municipal technician writes a report, either confirming its eligibility or declaring it ineligible. If the property is considered to be eligible, then there's a plenary, in the next plenary session, approval of the declaration is given. Once approval has been given for the declaration, we move into the second phase, which is the request for the license itself. The request for a license must be accompanied with a technical report. The content of that technical report will be, well, it will vary as the level of compliance of the house or houses will vary with the MIT criteria. Those houses which are entirely compliant, there will be there is a requirement for a technical project called a basic minimization project, which is not to be confused with the basic project defined by Annex 1 of the technical code. The contents of the minimization basic project are firstly to define the property, to describe the property in a technical fashion, its measurements, and a description of its construction, but most importantly, its dimensions. If any aspect of the technical specifications of the property are not compliant with those required by the minimization licenses, then another additional part of the technical report is required. The extent of the technical report describing those works which are necessary for the property to be compliant depend on the type of works that are required to make it compliant. If those works are considered small works, obra menor, then the requirements are very few. It's a general graphic description and a budget. If there are structural works required, then a basic project described by Annex 1 in the technical code would be required. Now, let's take a look at the criteria which are required in order for a property to be considered eligible. The first of those is simply that the property is built on what is designated SNU land, suelo no urbanizable, greenbelt land. It doesn't matter if that is protected greenbelt land or common greenbelt land, both are eligible. The second requirement is that the property must have been finished before the entry date of the LOTUP, the LOTUP, which is the current planning legislation valid in the community of Valencia, the autonomic community of Valencia. That date is the 20th of August, 2014. The last criteria is that the shape of the plot be a rural shape. The definition of rural shape is explained within the orientation guidebook. Examples are given of what is considered to be a rural shape and what is not considered to be a rural shape. If your property meets those three criteria, your property is eligible. Now it's a question of proving that the property meets those criteria. And also that the procedure, the relevant procedure for your property is a DSI, an individual application. The alternative to DSI or individual applications is a special plan, a PE, Plan Especial, which is a collective procedure. The deciding factor as to whether your procedure is DSI or whether it's PE, individual or collective, is the density of constructions in a hectare surrounding your property. The minimum and maximum densities of construction are explained in the guidebook. If a property finds itself within an area such that there are less than 3 properties constructed in a hectare, that's always going to be an individual or DSI application. In the case that there are more than 10 in a hectare, that's always going to be a collective or PE, plan especial situation. Between 10 and 3, both options are possible, and your local authority will establish a criteria as to which density of construction is for them considered to be appropriate for DSI or individual applications. The next step is proving that your property is in fact eligible and you do in fact own the property. And most of that documentation is available online. You will be required to provide maps and a certificate from the land registry called a nota simple, proving that the property was finished before the 20th of August 2014, that your plot does in fact have a rural shape and the property is to be found on SNU land. A complete list of all the documentation which must be attached to your application is given both in the guidebook, as we've seen before, and also on the application form itself. As mentioned before, a lot of the information can be obtained free of charge from several sites, one of which is Catastro. Here's an explanation of how to access Catastro. Once you're in, there are several ways of finding your property. Simply introducing the Catastro reference number or the address, or even just clicking on the crosshairs of the location tool will take you to your property. Once you're there, then it's a question of clicking on the plot of land, and the file for Catastro for that property will come up. It's all public information, and it's a question then of choosing what you want to access, and it could be the size of the plot, the age of the construction. All that information is contained on the file in Catastro, and it's all of public in the public domain. It could be the maps which you are required to attach. It is possible to change the scale of the maps that you're interested in printing off. I would suggest 1 to 5,000 for a location map, and for proving the shape of the plot, perhaps a 1 to 500 scale. Once you have those those maps visualized, then printing them off is a very simple process. Creating a PDF, there's an icon for doing that. Then, once you have the information about your construction in terms of the location and the age of construction, You must also, as we've mentioned, prove the class of land on which your property is constructed. Now, you can do that yourself, or you could ask your municipal technician to give you a certificate stating that's the case. To do it yourself, you merely need to access the Cartographic Institute's webpage and locate your property, which is just zooming in to find it. And then once you've found it, you will see that the property, there are different filters for different types of information, and one of the types of information by default tends to be the class of land. And if you click on the other categories of information to unclick them to make sure they're not showing, then the exclusive information relating to the land will be the class of land. And as you'll see, it will say SNU followed either by a P or by a C if it is to be accepted. Printing what you're seeing on the screen is also a simple process. There's an icon for printing the area that you have selected and its class of land. But as I say, you can also do that by requesting your municipal technician to give you a certificate stating that the type of land that your property is on is SNU. So now that we have the documentation that we need to attach to the application, let's take a look at the application form itself. So it says at the top there, it's GV60301, the request form for an individual minimization license. And then you have to fill out the space where your town hall must be placed there. And then it begins with Mr. or Mrs. of legal age, nationality, your ID number, whatever that may be for you, with your address here as well, and your telephone number and email. The next section describes who is appearing, who's making this representation. It's in your own name, or you are a representative for someone else, and in which status you're appearing. Are you the owner, or are you the person that is legally capable of exercising this right? So the next section goes on to describe the location of the property itself. It is a brief description of how big it is in terms of square meters, and the fiscal reference number that the property has been designated, the cadastral reference number, and also the page number in which the land registry has registered your property. All this information is available on your deed. It will be on your deed, and of course we've just seen the video about how to identify your property in Catastro on their webpage and bring up the cadastral reference number if you don't already have it. It then goes on to state that you are making a declaration that the works for the house were finished before the cut-off date of the 20th of August 2014. The following section is about you declaring that the property has water and you have a waste collection system, and that your residual water system does not contaminate the ground. It isn't asking you for MIT compliance at this point. It's simply saying that it is a house. It's asking you there's a house it's got water and you deal with your rubbish in some way, but we're not dealing with compliance. It goes on to state what the definition of a house is in terms of the legislation, and that you are declaring that this is a house as opposed to being a shed or an industrial building. You also are, by making this declaration, stating that the density of construction of properties within the hectare is within that permitted boundaries that we spoke about before. And then finally, that the class of land on which the property is constructed is SNU, or rural land. It only remains to sign and date the application form, and that is the end of the process. Then all of that documentation and the application form itself should be given in to your town council, and just wait for a response. While you're waiting for a response, then that's the time to start looking about the compliance of your property with the technical specifications and the necessity for you to contact a technician for the second part of the application process, which is the request for the license. In that phase, you will need to contact a technician, an architect, or something similar, a technical architect or a civil engineer, to express or declare that the property is compliant, and if it isn't compliant in some aspect, to prepare the technical report or project necessary, such that they can see that the works will make the property compliant once they're finished. You then have a period of 4 years once the technical report has been submitted to your council and they have accepted the proposal that you have submitted, to carry out the works. So if any works are required, you are given a period of 4 years to carry out those works. Thank you very much for listening.